Okay. Take your Bible and open to Genesis chapter 5. And if you need a Bible, should be one available, maybe even more than one, under the chairs nearby you. If you grab a brown one, it's going to be the New Living Translation. If you grab a blue one, it's going to be the English Standard Version, which is what I'll be using this evening. We're going to take a look at Genesis chapter 5, and then also along with it, the beginning of chapter 6. And the reason for that, if you think, well, it's a little strange, do 5:1 to 6:8, it's because if you remember back when I introduced Genesis, there is this literary marker in the book of Genesis, which is the Hebrew word toledot, which you will see translated as generations. And we find one of these in chapter 5, verse 1. This is the book of the generations of, in this case, Adam. And then the next one comes in chapter 6, verse 9. These are the generations of Noah. So as far as a unit of a toledot here, chapter 5, verse 1 through chapter 6, verse 8 are, I believe, intended to all go together. Before we get into the specifics of the text, kind of step back and take a big picture view of where we're at so far. We've had, obviously, creation, Genesis chapters 1 and 2, fall in the garden in Genesis chapter 3, and Adam and Eve being removed from the garden at the end of chapter 3. And then last week, chapter 4 described the birth of their children, Cain, of course, who killed Abel, and then was sent away eastward. Then we had his genealogy, Cain's genealogy, down to the 6th generation. And then chapter 4 ended with the birth of another son of Adam and Eve named Seth, which speaks to the line of the promised seed from Genesis 3:15. And as the chapter concludes, we see this, that after Seth's son was born, people, it says here, began to call upon the name of the Lord. Last verse of chapter 4. So tonight, we get the last section of Genesis before Noah and the flood. So by the end of tonight, we'll be introduced to Noah. So it's a fast-moving section. Chapter 5, much of it being a genealogy that covers a little over 1,400 years in one chapter. But there's, besides the genealogy, some fascinating things to consider timeline-wise, so we'll take a look at that tonight as well. All right, Genesis chapter 5, we begin with verses 1 and 2. It says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created." So, it's a summary of the creation of man. And there's actually a little play on words here. And in fact, no two English translations have this word translated the same way. And I'll show you what I mean here. The same Hebrew word, Adam, which you can hear obviously Adam, occurs 5 times in Genesis chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. 5 times. The last 2 of these are clearly Adam, the man with that name. If you look at verse 3 and 4, right? When Adam had lived 130 years. We know we're talking about the man Adam. Verse 4, the days of Adam after he fathered Seth. We're talking about the man, Adam. But the 3 times that it occurs in verses 1 and 2 that I just read is a question mark here that each translates a little differently. So the ESV in those 3 occasions has Adam, capital A, is the man Adam. Then it has man, lowercase m. And then it has, it's in verse 1, when God created man. And then it has man, capital M, in verse 2. The King James Version has Adam, capital A, Adam. Then it has man, lowercase m. And then it has Adam again, capital A. Whereas the ESV has man, capital M. The NIV has Adam, mankind, lowercase m, and mankind, capital M. The New Living Translation has Adam, human beings, and human. So, Adam, the guy with the name, or man, lowercase m, is the referring to the individual character, the husband of Eve, but it's also the same word that's used here, according to verse 2, as the title for humans, what we might think of as mankind. And it's also related to the word Adamah, which is translated ground. Remember, out of the ground, God formed Adam. So you got, it's just fun to see. No two translations get this exactly the same, between when to use Adam, when to use man, lowercase m, when to use man, referring to mankind. They're all a little bit different. Because you can see at the end of verse 2, it's got to be talking about more than just Adam when it says when they were created. All right, on to the genealogies. Going to read a big chunk here. All right. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years, had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Kenan. Enosh lived after he fathered Kenan 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he fathered Mahalalel. Kenan lived after he fathered Mahalalel 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he fathered Jared. Mahalalel lived after he fathered Jared 830 years, had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he fathered Enoch. Jared lived after he fathered Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. I'll pause there. You can see the pattern here. Right? When X lived Y years, he fathered Z. X lived after he fathered Z, Y years, had other sons and daughters, unknown how many. Thus all the days of X were Y years, and he died. Now there's a slight exception to the pattern at the beginning of it to explain what's going on. So verse 3 tells us that Adam fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image. And of course that calls us back to Genesis chapter 1, with the idea being that like the animals, man begets man. Remember, the animals would produce after their own kind, right? The man, Adam, Eve, they don't have animals for children. Even though sometimes the children might act like animals, right? They're actual human children. Man begets man after their image, after their likeness. We see also the idea of being made in the image of God. Remember, Adam was made in the image of God, and so that's carried forward from generation to generation. Adam is made in the image of God, and his sons and daughters are made after his image. And this gets reinforced after the flood also in chapter 9, verse 6. The other thing to observe is the ending of each generation with the phrase, and he died. Maybe you heard it as I was reading through the verses. And he died, and he died, and he died. And this reminds us of the result of sin. In the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. And here there is none who escape it. And he died, and he died, and he died. Outside the garden, everyone dies, except one. The other exception to the flow here comes in verse 22 and verse 24, the end of what I read. Instead of Enoch lived after he fathered Methuselah, we are told Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah. So it is as though to live, at least the use of it here, for a number of years is said that way because living ends in death. You live those years and then you die. But that's not the case with Enoch. And so instead of it saying Enoch lived, it's so he walks with God. And then verse 24, he was not, for God took him. Now we know for certain, because we can cheat a little. From Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5, this means that Enoch did not die. The question that's raised is, well, why this phrase? Why does it say it this way, to walk with God, that he walked with God? Well, this idea of walking, it really echoes the account of God walking in the garden. It was a term of relationship, of close fellowship. So one can walk with God outside the garden. It's possible to walk with God outside the garden where previously Adam and Eve had walked with God. The same will be said about Noah in chapter 6, verse 9, where we pick up next week, that Noah walked with God. The other thing to consider is that Enoch is the seventh from Adam through Seth's line, and he walks with God. The seventh from Adam through Cain's line, we had last week, was Lamech, and he's the one that we get comments about having two wives and killing a man. So there's a striking contrast between the two lines. As you get to the seventh from Adam, you have Lamech on one side, right, a killer, and on the other side you have Enoch, who walks with God, has fellowship with the Lord, knows the Lord. Pick up with the final several generations, verse 25 here. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech, different Lamech, obviously. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son, called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And after Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, final several generations are listed out following the same formula as above, except that again, we're given more detail about one, this time Noah. And there's a hope placed upon Noah that he will somehow bring relief or comfort or rest, what sounds like a fix to the curse, right? The ground was cursed. Now that won't come in Noah himself, but in a descendant of Noah. In fact, ironically, the entire generation of Noah will be judged, will be wiped out. The genealogy at the end here breaks in that we're not told that Noah died. Now, he does. Noah walks with God like Enoch does, but Noah's going to die, unlike Enoch. But there's an important break in the story here, right? Before we kind of get to that point of, Noah's the end of Noah's life and continuing on with genealogies, there's an important break, which is going to be the flood story that obviously happened in the days of Noah. So we're just told here at the end of chapter 5, Noah had 3 sons. And you say, well, wait a second. What about this is the line of promise here. We're going father, son. Yeah, there's other sons and daughters. They don't really matter. Just the one person. Next one, next generation, other sons and daughters, but just the one is named, right? Because there's the line of promise here, the seed of the woman carrying through. And so now you get to Noah's sons. You say, wait, now there's 3 of them. What about the single line of promise? Well, you have to wait until after the flood to see how it continues. So I guess you'll have to come back. Now, before we get into chapter 6, I want to point out here a couple of kind of timeline things based on the genealogy we just read here in chapter 5. If we just start at 0, right, just start at 0 without trying to calculate or figure out the date of the first year. I know that 4004 is commonly given, but let's just start at 0 and work our way forward. And we count based on the years that are given in Genesis here, a couple of observations. Now, you can read that, of course, yes? I'm standing a few feet away from it. I don't think I can. So let me see if I use my magic button here, if it helps us out. No, wait, hold on. Let's try a different one. Oh, there we go. I mean, now I can read it at least. So I can read it to you, and you'll just have to take my word for what it says as I go through here. All right, this is the timeline from Adam to Noah. All right, observation number 1. Because of the lengths of life, there's a lot of generations being born before any are dying. Now, as it's listed in the chapter, you just have, these years. They're very large numbers for the years of their life, so you might not get it right away, which is why I wanted to point it out here. Over here are the births. Birth of Seth. I'm getting off the thing. Birth of Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah. Everybody's being born. Right? Nobody's dying until here. Adam died in year 930 after the birth of Lamech, who was Noah's father. Okay, so Adam's alive. He's around for all these generations. Then you can see, okay, we get to the birth of Noah here in the 1056th year, birth of Noah. Lamech was 182. And now you get some here. Enoch is actually the second to go because remember he's taken pretty, relatively young age. If you think you're old, you could say, well, Enoch was young and he was 365. So. And then, Seth here and Enosh. So see, now they're dying, but they all lived kind of overlapping of each other as far as their lives go. All right, and this is Noah, 500 years old, when he's told about the flood. There's Lamech's death, Methuselah's death, and then the flood. So, because of that, right, all of that overlap of the generations, even before Adam's death is recorded, with the added any or other sons and daughters, right? Every generation, other sons and daughters are born. The earth could populate unbelievably, very quickly and to great numbers. In fact, using even very conservative figures for each generation reproducing, by the time of the flood, it's estimated that there's 750 million to 4 billion people on the earth at that time. Even though you get such a small number, because again, the length of time that's going by here with all of these folks being born. So that's one thing to kind of consider. You say we get to the flood here, you've only had this little the genealogy of Cain here, you've got this genealogy of Seth. But because of the length of time that goes by here, right? We're talking 1,500 years from the creation to the time of the flood here. 1,600 years, 1,650 years. Hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of people on the earth at the time of the flood. As I said, Adam lives to see all of them except Noah. Methuselah, who lives, of course, the longest, right? 969 years. He dies the same year as the flood. Kind of interesting, huh? Makes you kind of speculate Did he die in the flood? Well, you would say, well, probably not, right? Because he's of the line of promise. But mathematically, he dies the same year of the flood. Another chart I want you to see here. Now, this goes forward. I recognize that, right? Noah's way at the top here. But I just found this absolutely fascinating when we consider here this timeline. Getting a little ahead, but Noah, who lives to 950, is actually still around for the first 50 years of Abraham's life. Isn't that wild? Noah survives the flood, right? Builds the ark, goes through the flood. He's alive through all of this. Do you see the blue line? That's Noah's life all the way down to the days of Abraham down here. All right. Now, which if you connect the dots, right, connect them, Abraham can hear about the flood direct from Noah, who is alive, Noah, to hear about creation from 6 generations that were alive to hear it direct from Adam. In other words, all it takes is you could go Adam, Methuselah, Noah, Abraham. Just like that, you've got direct information from creation all the way down to the days of Abraham. If you're not familiar, by the days of Abraham, there's lots of history already going on around the world, right? There's not a whole lot of mystery at that point. There's civilizations being dug up all over the place, right? In Babylon and Egypt and things like that. So fascinating. In fact, Shem, Noah's son, is around to see all the way to the days of Jacob. So he goes down to, when we think about Jacob, later on in Genesis, and you think about the family and them traveling, to Egypt and all of that, it's kind of a little mind-boggling to think about Shem still being around on the earth at that point, but that's what you have. All right, moving on to chapter 6 here. Now, the earth is populating, right? So I pointed that out. Multiplication is happening, right? So it's not just one generation, fathering someone. It's not just a couple families on the earth here. It's not just Cain's family and Seth's family. You have other sons and daughters and other sons and daughters, and as you're getting generations, lots and lots of generations here, and so you're talking hundreds of millions of people. So man is multiplying, lots and lots and lots. And here we read, chapter 6, verse 1 through 4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. All right. The sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. I hope you understand, it's a famously difficult paragraph to define for certain what is being described here. I'll give you a couple of views here, as well as what has become probably the most popular amongst especially recent, real quality from my perspective, Genesis scholars and Old Testament scholars and Hebrew scholars. All right. But the first view number 1, the sons of God are fallen angelic beings. All right. Now, this view is based on the fact that this phrase, sons of God, that you see here, right? The sons of God, mated with the daughters of man. Sons of God is used throughout the book of Psalms and the book of Job for I want to use the word angelic beings, some sort of spirit being, right? If you were with us on Wednesday nights, we were going through the Psalms. We came across this several times, right? The sons of God. And, it's these beings that dwell in the court of God. There's some form of a spirit being there, right? In the spiritual realm. And that's how sons of God is commonly used elsewhere in the Old Testament. The contrast between sons of God and daughters of man makes it sound like these beings were not human, right? So sons of God, daughters of man. It makes it sound like they're not human. And this view is very old. It was held from even before New Testament times. So in the writings between the Old and New Testament, even before the days of Jesus, this view was around, this idea. It's often combined with the view that the Nephilim, who are named here in verse 4, were giants, with the logic being that the offspring of angelic or spiritual beings with humans would result in this especially physically large, powerful size of the offspring. Okay? Just explaining this view. Some say the view is supported by the fact that angelic beings can take on human form. We have examples of that later on in Genesis chapter 19, for example. Opponents of the view say that angelic beings do not have the capacity for such relations, according to Mark 12:25, is where Jesus is saying they are like angels in heaven, right? They neither marry or given in marriage. They are like the angels in heaven. But again, the response to that is that these beings can take on human form. Some also point to 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19 as support that these fallen beings who did this, and here in Genesis 6, were then punished for this act. As I said, this view was held by intertestamental literature, it was held by early Jewish rabbis, and it was held by the early church fathers. All right, view number 2, there's only 3. View number 2, the sons of God were the men of the line of Seth, and the daughters of man were the women of the line of Cain. All right, now this view is based on the fact that there are 2 genealogies directly preceding this paragraph here in Genesis 6. You had it in Genesis 4, the line of Cain, and then you have in Genesis 5, the line of Seth. And the mentioning of Seth being made in Adam's image, who is in the image of God, suggests to some that the line of Seth is to be looked upon as the godly line, or the sons of God. In Luke chapter 3, Gospel of Luke chapter 3, if you're familiar, it traces genealogy back from Jesus through Joseph, all the way back to Adam, who it says, right, is the Son of God. So that's where they get some idea here. The thought then is that the wicked line of Cain began to intermarry with the godly line of Seth, leading to this great corruption on the earth. So this was the traditional interpretation since the 3rd century, supported by the reformers like Luther and Calvin and many others. The third view says that the sons of were at that time the men of the ruling line of Lamech, from which would be a dynasty of tyrants. So this view says that the sons of God, it's referring to nobles or aristocrats or princes who married girls outside their social status. So they were a ruling class, and they were supposed to administer justice, but instead, so great was the sin of the world at this time that they formed harems and just filled them with women. And their offspring were the Nephilim, heroes, which were these physically and politically powerful, well-known individuals, as they're called at the end of verse 4, mighty men of old, the men of renown. Supporters of this view point to the phrase of taking any of them they chose. You see, it says that the sons of God saw the daughters of man were attractive. They took as their wives any they chose. So this kind of Babylonian Esther-like situation, right, where they're just gathering up all of the beautiful women to put them out into these harems. Others as well did similar things, like Pharaoh. All right, then, as I said, very common nowadays is to combine views 1 and view 3. View 2 has kind of fallen by the wayside, right? This idea that it's referring to Cain's line and Seth's line intermarrying. What has kind of risen is a combination of this being a ruling class in those days here at the beginning of Genesis chapter 6 that were what you might think of as demon-possessed. Men controlled by evil forces doing evil things. And this is the idea being that there was definitely divine involvement here, right? There was a spiritual element here combined with the wickedness of the human heart, and it was in essence devolving humanity into these greater and greater forms of evil that lead to the flood. So the offspring described here, called Nephilim, it's actually just a transliteration from the Hebrew. So it doesn't tell us anything. The word behind it means to fall. So again, some think, it's referring to these fallen spiritual beings, like fallen angels or something like that. But that view is, again, largely kind of, specifically, that's kind of fallen away because they think, no, it's the idea of to fall means these powerful men who would fall upon others. In essence, had the power to control and use their will in any way that they wanted. That's why they're called Nephilim. They're not necessarily, some translations have giants. Now, you think about giants, sometimes we think kind of in a mythological sense, but rather powerful, domineering, politically strong, right? They're called, again here, mighty men, men of renown. They were human, right? They would die. They would die in the flood, just like all the others. They're not, demigods or half God or immortals or anything like that. I think they were satanically empowered evil men. And so that's why you have this description of there being great wickedness and violence on the earth. And God was going to do something about it. So given all that kind of difficulty in understanding what's being described here with these sons of God coming into the daughters of men and the Nephilim and all of that, I think that the paragraph the purpose of it is pretty clear, which is to set up the situation that things were bad. All right? What had happened here between Genesis 3 and 4 and 5, with the generations after the fall going by, and as people are multiplying on the earth, and the generations are expanding, it's devolving. Humanity is devolving into this situation where even something as grotesque as what's described here, whatever it is, was taking place. Now on verse 3 here, it says, the 120 years, right? God says his days shall be 120 years. Again, two views here. One is that it's not speaking of the lifespan of humans being reduced down to 120 years from these longer numbers of 900 and something. Generations later, Abraham significantly outlives 120 years. It could mean that. It could mean as a general rule, which has been the general case down through humanity since these days of what we have in recorded history of people living at most to about 120 years. So if it's meant that way, it's kind of in a general sense, not like, at your 120th year and 364 days, you're going to fall down dead. But it likely refers to the span of time from the proclamation here to the flood, wiping everyone out. So we have here, Noah at 500 years old. We're not told, specifics here time-wise, but we are told that at 600 he goes into the ark. So it's approximately there. It could be that when God said it, 120 years is what they had kind of left before God was going to wipe them out. And that would give time for the ark to be built and for people to repent of this wickedness that was so rampant. And of course, it could be intentionally ambiguous and point in both directions, something that's common in biblical literature, which is, there's one professor of mine used to say that the purposeful ambiguities of a lot of these things in the Bible that we wrestle over, that we go, it's this view, it's that view, it's the third view, I'm not exactly sure, that God was very intentional in how he gave us his word so that we would do exactly that. So that we wouldn't just go, oh yeah, I get it, I know it, I'm moving on, but we would have to study and dig and have conversations about it and maybe change our ideas and our views and learn and learn and learn. And so that's why some of these things are a bit ambiguous. But I think the big point is clear. And here's the real point. Verse 5 through 8. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So no matter how we understand the uncertain ideas of verses 1 through 4, it's clear the world was spiraling into greater and greater wickedness to the point that God now describes man's heart as only evil continually. Amazing what God saw as good in creation before the fall. Now he looks and he sees what's great is wickedness. That's what's widespread. That's what he sees. Yet Noah at the end here represents a kind of a new Adam, a new beginning, a new start, described here as one who found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Now, to kind of wrap this up, the point that the narrator wants to make here, even, as he gives us this genealogy in chapter 5 and some of this information leading to the flood in chapter 6, right? Even though some of the details may be obscure, is that mankind as a whole is running headlong into rampant wickedness. That the sin that came in chapter 3 and is described there in the fall, entering the world, grows to some degree in chapter 4 with Cain and Lamech, now explodes as the generations go by and humans are multiplying on the earth. But I want us to see, though, the narrator's communicating to us a drive forward here in hope. Even in the midst of describing kind of this mess of a situation, right? The world he describes, it's bad, it's getting worse. Quickly, as you move from Adam to Noah. And there are plenty of examples from Cain and Lamech in chapter 4 to whatever's being described in the beginning of chapter 6. It's bad. And there is judgment for it, right? You hear it all throughout chapter 5. And he died, and he died, and he died, and he died. The Lord is grieved and will judge. He will blot out everything he created. He won't abide with man for more than 120 years, he says. But there's hope. There's hope. End of chapter 4. People began to call on the name of the Lord. Chapter 5. Enoch walked with God and did not die. Chapter 6. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So you have this dual theme that runs throughout the scriptures, right? Make no mistake, there is sin, it is everywhere, it is destructive, and it will be judged. Pictured in the flood as a foreshadowing of the end final judgment of all. But there is also knowing the Lord, walking with him, finding favor in his eyes. So all are corrupted, right? That strikes all of them, but not all are condemned. There is grace. There is salvation. It's already pictured here, and it's ours now through faith in Christ. The ability to know God, to walk with God, to call upon his name, to find favor in his eyes. If we know him, then we won't face the judgment that is coming. So that's a picture here of what's being described. Genesis 5 and beginning of 6. Let's pray. Father, as with other places, Lord, in your word, there's things that we could discuss that were uncertain about. But Lord, I think the picture here in these opening chapters of Genesis following the sin of Adam and Eve is very clear. Sin was widespread. It was horrendous, as you describe here, the heart of man just being evil, continuously evil. The corruption spreading with the multiplying generations all over the world. And yet, God sprinkled in here is hope, is fellowship with God, calling upon the name of the Lord, walking with you, finding favor in your sight. What a wonderful truth, Lord, to know that we do not have to be condemned as sinners, but Lord, that you would make a way that we could be forgiven and restored to you, that we could be your children, your friends, no longer enemies, no longer those under the curse and headed for eternal judgment, as so many were. We thank you for it, Lord. Your grace truly is amazing. In Jesus' name, amen.